bookshop at Beverly Farms, selling books in the community since 1968.
Oh, good.
Monday through Saturday, 9 to 5. I was going to introduce Steve, but Andrea came by with a few remarks from her.
Are you serious?
Yes, and she asked if I would read these to you because she's
In a British accent.
Oh, yes. I'm afraid.
Where is
but
she?
She.
In England.
Yeah.
Oh, she's
She fled from this?
Yes,
She's going to refresh her accent. Well,
you'll see.
yes.
Okay. Welcome to the launch party, everyone. I'm so sorry to be missing the fun, but I'm sure sales will be brisk for our wonderful local independent bookstore, and that you will all derive wisdom and entertainment from Steve's wonderful second book, The Practical Negotiator. At bedtime, our 2-year-old grandson always pleads for just one more when his books are finished. Like him, I promise that you can dip into this book at any page and find it impossible not to keep reading more. Each Q&A presents universal problems and situations, and you just can't wait to see how Steve will present solutions and approaches full of pragmatism and humor. Steve is a great and swift writer. No wife has suffered injury during the making of this book. I don't think I did much to help him create it, but I am deeply happy with the dedication. Thank you. And here's to your next one. Love, Andrea. So, here's Steve.
I'm blown away, Steve. It's nice to see so many friends here, and to welcome you to a chance to find out about the Practical Negotiator. It's a book that's been a long time in coming, but a short time in the writing, which sounds ridiculous but true. There are questions in it from about 32 or 33 countries and about 23 or 24 American states, and they cover everything from in-laws to car mechanics and many other kinds of issues that folks face in normal life. It is the second book I've written. The first one, I had a fight with the author because he wanted to change, with the editor. Well, that's one of the lessons of the book, is never negotiate with yourself. The editor wanted to have all the sentences in my first book end in prepositions. And I said, no. And he said, but that's how people talk and how people write nowadays. And I said, not Steve Cohen.
Yeah.
Good, good.
You will note, if you read a copy of this book, that most of the sentences end in prepositions. Because this is aimed at being accessible for anybody who can read English. And you can look in the index of the book and see that it really does cover a vast range of issues that people raise. I got interviewed today. Someone said, we have a problem with a boss who yells. And so I went to the index to see what was in there, and believe it or not, the very last item in the index is yelling bosses. So enjoy the book, and enjoy the wine and cheese and crackers. It's very high quality cheese straight from Costco. They do a good job. But enjoy it, and if you have any questions, you can catch me.
Well, Steve, could you
Yes.
give a quick synopsis of the book, the message?
Well, the message of the book is that everybody has an inner negotiator in them, and it helps you find them. And what it basically does is it takes these real-life questions that came from real people. I changed all their names because I'm masquerading as a gentleman. And but the issues that they raised really are remarkably interesting. And rather than saying you must do X and then Y and then Z, I present in each response a range of possible ways to deal with a problem, so that it's always a matter of the reader being given the opportunity to figure out for themselves the best way to go forward, rather than getting direction from someone who doesn't really know the situation. Because even a negotiation with a car mechanic can vary enormously, depending upon who it is and what the problem is, and what the market is in which you're working.
Can you give an example just from the book? Fun to hear.
Well, in the question about a boss who yells, and I don't remember for sure because I'd have to read it to you all, but it talks about, first of all, trying to figure out whether they're yelling at you or whether they're yelling because there's some kind of aggravation that they're dealing with. And then responding to a yelling person is to be quiet, to talk quietly. And I'll look at your spouse, everybody. And being quiet and dealing with it in that way. Another possibility is to see whether your colleagues are also folks who are recipients of yelling. And if the boss yells at everybody, you know not to take it personally. And it may even be that if you and your colleagues get it together, you can communicate in an effective way, whether it's over the boss's head or something else, to try to get her or him to clean up their act. So, that's sort of the kind of
It's good.
advice. But different things for different people and different times. What fascinates me, truly fascinates me, is that, as I said, the questions come from many countries, and the universality of the issues that people are dealing with is mind-boggling. I'll say 15 years ago, I got an email from an unknown woman in India who was about to start publishing a web magazine for women in India. And she said, "Steve, I'd like you to be my advice columnist." And I said to myself, I've never been to India. I don't think I've ever been a woman. And, this is ridiculous. But until the magazine folded, which had nothing to do with me, I had a tremendous amount of traffic from women in India asking questions. It was fascinating. And of the questions that they asked, a very heavy proportion relate to in-law problems. But I'm under the impression that problems with in-laws actually happen in other countries too. So, there's just, this has really been a learning experience for me, responding to these questions, and a lot of fun. And it's the kind of book you can put down and don't have to worry about the plot getting ahead of you. Mark.
Steve, what's the toughest negotiating situation you ever faced, and how did it work out?
I have 4-year-old daughters. They won.
That's right.
I don't know. I don't know what the toughest one really is. I think the one that I'm most embarrassed about was buying a car and being so fixated on getting a good seat, because my back was very bad at that point in time, that I didn't even negotiate about the price. When I found the car that had the best seat, I just said, that's it, I'm going to buy the car. And, I could have saved a lot of money if I had been able to wrap my brain around more than one issue. So part of the lesson to me from that failure on my part is that when you're negotiating, you have to try to think of as many issues as you can.
But a lot of people, I think, put a priority, at least as I see as an architect, they put a priority on something like that seems very small and
Right.
peripheral, but it takes on a huge importance and influences all the other major decisions they make. So there you have it right there. That's
Exactly.
But you can take advantage of that, right? You read Steve's book, right?
I guess I better.
But part of the problem is, understanding why we want something is the most important question that we have to ask in the negotiation process. Because if we just assume that, you know, taking this thing home will solve everything, or 5 days of memorial, whatever the book is, that, you know, that doesn't necessarily really meet our gut interest, you know, what really drives our decision. And so we have to sort of be able to ask ourselves, why am I here? You know how a teenager will ask her or his parents, and your point is? When you're negotiating, you've got to ask yourself that question, and ask the same question, not in those terms, of the person with whom you're negotiating, so that you need to understand, why am I here, and why are they here? And then you can craft a resolution that's more likely to yield an agreement that works. Because I'll sort of finish with my favorite negotiation definition of a good negotiation. Negotiation is a process that leads to an agreement each party will willingly fulfill. If you think you've lost, you're going to try to weasel out. And the negotiation's result is failure.
So it's a win.
Have you sent copies to Washington?
I've
Maybe you better go.
been interviewed by a lot of people about that on the radio for the past 3 or 4 weeks, and from all around the country, and they weren't negotiating. There was never a question of negotiating. What was happening in Washington was war. It was an insurgency, and part of the problem is, who should have been negotiating with whom? Should John Boehner have been negotiating with the Tea Party types, or with Harry Reid, or with President Obama? Who was his really proper negotiation partner?
Tea Party.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's a very hard thing to do, because, you know, the mainstream or moderate Republicans are up against a terrible dilemma. Do I vote what I think is right, or do I vote what I think will get me reelected and not killed in a primary?
Or just kill.
God forbid.
Do you see a lack of civility in your interactions with people, or, I mean, is it getting worse, or?
Yes. And I don't know if anybody ever heard that question, but whether I see a lack of civility with people. We are unfortunately taking labels more and more seriously. Consumer Reports did a survey 5 years ago where 71% of the people interviewed, no, 61%, I got it, I have to get the numbers right. 61% said that they were comfortable haggling or negotiating. 5 years later, the number of people who felt safe haggling was down to 48%. That's a 25% drop. And they interviewed me about this for the August issue. And I said to the guy who called, who, you know, thought I'd have some, you know, sort of more consumerish answer. I said, if you look at what's going on in Washington, this is back in August or July, whenever it was, people are not negotiating. They are just stonewalling one another, treating each other as whatever their label happens to be. And that's a bad example for the rest of us. Civil society is under threat. And the mission statement of my negotiation consulting business from the beginning was advance the cause of civility. And that's, you know, as simple as that. And in somebody's inscription here, for a child of theirs, I you know, talk to her, whom I've never met, about advancing the cause of civility. I don't remember the words I used, but
That's what you said, yeah.
and
Right here.
I mean, I think that people who are serious about pursuing civility and making it happen are our only hope. And that's what's disconcerting. We cannot simply assume that everybody's nice. that everybody's going to step forward and say, that's not right, or that should be done a better way.
Steve, do you think the fact that so many people rely on technology instead of conversing directly, like we are now, and the way people, how they communicate, the inflection, the tone, the way it's delivered, completely influences the way people ingest that information?
Email is an appalling way to communicate. Even worse. The electronic forms of communication, other than radio and TV, where you have some degree of feeling of the sound and the look of a person. They tend to brusque ways of expressing oneself, and they're easily misinterpreted. And then, of course, the biggest enemy of all is spell check. I was coming out of an airport and going to meet Andrea, who had driven down to get me, and I texted her from the ramp off the plane, "I'll meet you at the gate." And I pushed send, and then I looked at it and said, "I'll meet you at the hate." Spell check was invented by somebody very scary.
Yeah.
So, everybody hear enough of me?
Very good.
I have a question. So if you're in the middle of a negotiation and it's not going well, and you realize that what you want, what they want, are really at odds with each other.
Right.
But you want something to come of it, some conclusion that is sort of okay for both sides. So what do you tell yourself when, to take a shift, what's a successful way to shift the way things are going and have a move with a more positive momentum? Is there something you say to yourself? Is there a tone? What tips could you give us if we're in the middle of it and we're like, oh, this is not going the way I would like? What are some tips to get it?
There are so many tips, I'm having a really tough time, breaking them down. One thing you look for before you go into negotiation is, what is my BATNA, which stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. So that, for example, a very easy example, if you want to buy a Ford in Greater Boston, there are dozens of dealerships to which you can go, and if you don't like the way things are going, you can go to the one next door, or down the street, or 5 miles away, whatever it is. So that you need to think, when you're negotiating with another person, does this hold promise, or am I better off walking? And many times it is better to walk. Many times you can solve your own problem by yourself. The other thing to think about is, are we understanding each other? The most important thing you want to do, negotiation has one commodity that's exchanged every single time. And the commodity is information. And, there's the classic way of describing how you should communicate. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in that ratio. So that you've got to ask questions, but then listen hard and see what kind of things you can get out of the answers that you're given, upon which you can build the possibility of reaching agreement. But maybe you can't. Maybe you're completely on different pages, and what could be worse than reaching an agreement with a person where you think that one thing is going to happen, they think that another thing is going to happen, and so you're 2 ships that cross in the night. So you need to make sure that you're clear in your understanding of one another. One of the ways to do that is to listen to what another person says and say, if I understood you correctly, you said A, B, C, D. And they may hear what you've heard them say and say, boy, Steve doesn't understand a word I said. Or, God, that sounds awful now, coming out of somebody else's mouth. And so they have a chance to recast or reframe what they've said. So that's one way to do it. Sometimes when someone has said something that's really appalling to you, you put on a poker face. and you just go completely silent, you show no emotion, and get them to think, what have I said? Why are they not responding? And maybe that will also generate a more favorable approach. But just agreeing in order to agree is not an appropriate goal. Unless there is something that's going to do you serious damage if you don't agree. If you get locked into a room with someone and say, you guys can't get out until there's an agreement, there's some motivation that's exterior to the actual substance of the negotiation. But agreeing to agree, means we're motivated. But the motivation has to be related to actual serious interests that individuals have. I don't know if that's enough of a set of hints to you, but that's a little bit about what this book is about. Going past the outer edges of something and getting in and taking a look at it. But you have to look at yourself first. Smiles. Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank all of you for being